Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name's Amanda and I'll be your host for this evening. Tonight we'll be discovering how humans have adapted to crises in the past and what we can learn from this today. Here's what we've got coming up. So we're going to start this evening with Dr. Sally Reynolds, who'll be telling us how ancient humans have used the world's resources in the past and how this has changed over time. We're then going to have a short break just for 5 minutes, and then we'll be welcoming Dr. Philip Riris, who'll be telling us how prehistoric humans were resilient to climate change. Then we're going to have a question and answer session. And you might notice at the bottom of your screen, there's an Ask the Question button. We'd like you to use this to ask questions to our speakers. And you can also use this to see the questions that are already in the box and vote on them. And the questions that have the most votes are the ones that are most likely to get answered. We may not be able to get to all the questions, but we will try to answer as many as we can. This is the fourth in our online public lecture series, looking at how Bournemouth University's research has created impact in the world. To tell us more, here's our Vice-Chancellor, Dr. John Vinney.
Thank you for joining us for this evening's public lecture, which highlights research brilliance at Bournemouth University. The lecture series covers many of our areas of academic strength, from healthy ageing to protecting the environment, championing culture and heritage, challenging marginalisation, managing crisis and disaster, and helping to support Dorset's economy. We're very proud of all the work that we do at the university and the impact that it has on the world, and I hope that this evening's lecture really provides you with a new insight into the work that we're doing to change the world and make it a better place.
We're using Crowdcast for tonight's event. For those of you who haven't joined us before, you may not be familiar with the platform. There's just a couple of things to remember. Firstly, we can't hear or see you, so to interact with the speakers and with each other, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, then please use the Ask a Question box. The chat is where you can talk to each other, you can express your thoughts, you can give us feedback, and so on. The other thing to remember as well is that the speakers may be asking you questions, and they'll do this via a poll, which will appear on your screen. When the poll appears, please remember that it's completely anonymous. All the answers appear as percentages, so please get involved and answer the questions when they pop up. Thank you. So without further ado, let's get on with tonight's event. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sally Reynolds, who will be talking about her work exploring the fossilised footprints in the White Sands National Park in New Mexico. Over to you, Sally.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Amanda. I hope everybody can hear me and see me. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you tonight. I'm very excited, and I always am, at any opportunity to talk about my work. And I hope in this lecture we'll be able to stimulate some of your thoughts and your thinking, partly about the relevance that the past can have for the present and how it can help us shed light on some of the challenges that we have to face today. So the lecture that I'll be giving tonight is about messages from the past and how we can learn about past human resource use and how that might help us look into the future and some of the challenges that we face. I'm going to take you on a journey this evening back to North America. And although I can't review our species trajectory in total, we arose in Africa, left, moved out into Europe, and then traveled towards the Bering Straits and traveled down into North America. Based on a seminal paper that we published last year in a very important journal called Science, we determined that humans, our species, Homo sapiens, were already in New Mexico, which is the southern North America, by between 21 and 23,000 years. I'm interested in how our species has been able to survive. We're not very big, we're not very strong. Apart from our technology, we don't seem to have physically very much going for us. So my idea has always been, how have we been able to survive against these odds? When we arrive in North America, though, by this time period that we've established, 21 to 23,000 years, we are already competent hunters, having learned these skills in Africa and then in Europe. We are tool users. We can speak languages. We're capable of cooperative hunting. We're able to adapt to new environments. And so some of this evidence that we have from this site called White Sands is evidence that we can use to reconstruct how people lived, but also, more importantly, to look at their role within the ecosystem and how they were relating to other animals. When we find ordinary archaeological sites, we find bones in association with each other. But ichnology, which is the study of ancient footprints, it doesn't let us look at the bones. Instead, it is fossilized behavior, where we can actually get a sense of how these animals are reacting to each other. So tonight I'll be talking to you about fossil footprints, but it's a lot more than that. It's showing how some of these vignettes, these postcards from the past, can be helped turn our ideas about our human exploitation to our advantage in the context of today. So we'll be talking about the double trackway. So that's a mother, we think it's a mother, and a toddler walking out across this playa. Then we'll be talking about a sloth hunting sequence. And I'll be asking you to think for yourselves how you would go about the job of hunting a sloth. We'll talk about more generally what we know about humans interacting with megafauna. Megafauna is a word that's often used, but it's basically any animal over 1,000 kilos in body mass. And then finally, looking at the ideas of humans as apex predators and what that means for the other animals on the planet, but also what it means for ourselves. So, which animals existed in North America when we arrived? And here I've got this beautiful picture, which gives you, at least one of you, Joe Belasco, will be extremely pleased to see this image because they say they've been dreaming about mammoths. Well, yes, the Columbian mammoths were certainly a part of the fauna that were present in this site that I'll be talking tonight about White Sands. There were also camelids. So think of members of the llama family, for example, dire wolves, not just from Game of Thrones. These are real animals that were known from North America. Giant ground sloths, herbivorous, but still very scary with these razor-sharp claws. The mammoths I've already mentioned, the American lions, and the bobcats. This is a new fauna to which humans had never been exposed. However, humans, much like many other primates, are adaptable when it comes to looking at new habitats and how to exploit them. So although we never seen very long before we started to make our presence on the ecosystem felt. Now, the locality of White Sands is in North America, in the state of New Mexico. It has recently been redesignated as a national park from a national monument, and it wasn't very. It used to be the site of a Paleolake Ontario. Something to do with climate changes. At the end of the Pleistocene, the world was warming, and as we move into the Holocene, we see the world warms, it becomes wetter and more forested. We are using some of the work in White Sands to understand whether it was humans or climate change or some combination of the two of them that actually caused the extinction. Now we're going to have a look at a little video which will give you, I hope, a beautiful overview of what the site looks like. Now, as you can see there, that was David Bustos, who's the resource manager at the site, brushing away carefully at these tracks, that we have what we call abundant ichnosurfaces. We have surfaces full of human tracks, and tracks of mammoths and tracks of dire wolves and tracks of sloths. And they are called ghost tracks because the fill of the tracks is sometimes visible because it's got a little bit more water in it, and other times it's completely invisible. So we call them ghost tracks. So what we have is kilometers and kilometers and kilometers of footprint surfaces documenting different periods of engagement, episodes of engagement with humans and other fauna. And this has given us an incredible opportunity to look into the past and to see how these animals were reacting with the humans and how the humans were reacting to these animals. Were they predators? Were they prey? And how were these animals allowing themselves to be approached by the humans? So we have a lot of ichnites, which is actually the formal scientific word for footprints. What we don't have is a lot of organic material. We don't have beautifully defined Clovis stone tools, which does not allow us to say what sort of culture these people belong to, although of course we are still continuing the search for that. We don't have organic bone materials. We've sampled for environmental DNA, and we haven't been able to find it yet. So in truth, what we needed in order to drive our research forward was something very simple and very important, and that is a way to date the tracks. In previous research that we had published, we had used the co-association of extinct animals with a known extinction date and humans to be able to place some of the evidence towards the end of the Pleistocene. But last year, we got very lucky in this specific trench that you can see now on your screens. This trench enabled us to get two very thin seed layers. And because we had organic material then, because the seeds are an organic material and they contain something that you can use for radiocarbon dating, it meant that finally we had an opportunity to bracket the dates, the lower date of 23,000 years and the upper date of 21,000 years. And it's lovely to think about in scientific research how sometimes the smallest and most humble little bit of evidence can be vital. And in this case, it was, because it was these tiny little seeds, the Rupia cirrhosa seeds, which is the seed of the spiral ditch grass. It is a very innocuous and really tiny little seed, but because there was this growth, this mat of spiral ditch grass around 23,000 years, there was a layer that formed in the sediments. It was then covered over by a thin layer of sand, and then eventually humans walked on top of that. That layer of footprints was covered by sand, and then another sea layer around about 21,000 years was laid down. It's the co-association of the sea layers with the human footprints that gave us this unparalleled opportunity to date the footprints. And what it showed us is that humans were in North America far older, longer period of time than we had previously realized, probably by as much as 6,000 or 7,000 years, which is really quite significant. So ultimately, we went from understanding that the humans were coexisting with these megafauna, but now for a much longer period of time, where we therefore still going to be playing a role in their extinction. Ultimately, the question hence rests on the human and megafaunal interactions. How were we looking and assessing our relationship with these ancient fauna? So this is a piece of paleo art that we commissioned for that particular work by David Bonadonna, who is based in Milan. And here he has these young teenagers, because that is what the footprint evidence suggests these were, young teenagers enjoying looking out at the megafauna. But is that all? Were we in fact only spending our time watching the megafauna? How are we using our opportunities to hunt in order to further our knowledge on this particular landscape? So the next slide is about messages from the past, humans as apex predators. How do we know that humans were apex predators? So this is a picture of the paleo art from something that we call the double trackway. The double trackway because it is two journeys, outward journey and a return journey with a human adult. I think of it as a mother, but it may well be an adolescent male. It features the toddler that she's holding in her arms. He or she is holding in their arms because the toddler's little footprints only appear when the adult stoops to put the child down to perhaps adjust their clothing or to get more comfortable or to swap sides. And then they pick up the child again and they continue on this mission all alone across this dangerous playa where we know there's just been recent rainfall. The substrate is slippy. The person is walking extremely fast. And we know that there is a giant sloth and a mammoth on the horizon. So here we have a picture of what this particular trackway looks like. So this is the double trackway. The top panel you can see is the ghost track phenomenon. The tracks are there, they're unexcavated, and you can see how they are only faintly discernible against the background of the white gypsum sands, of white sands. The second slide is the excavated trackways in which you can see that they walk in a very straight line, very determined, no hesitation, no deviation, with a clear idea of where they're going. They walk outwards and then a few hours later, there is the return journey. Importantly then is what the role of the child may have been. So in the second of these slides, we can see that there is a very small child's footprint, which pops up only at one or 2 points during the whole trackway. So we can see that the mum is actually holding the child and then putting the child down and then picking them up again. So in the second slide, we can see that we have interpreted the evidence in relation to how the mammoth and the sloth are interacting with the human tracks. So we assume that the human track maker is walking straight in one direction at a fast speed, 1.67 meters per second. That's almost running. That's almost you running towards your bus. You're about to start breaking into a jog. And we can see that at one point, the giant sloth comes by after the human has walked past and sense the human presence and scent on the landscape and immediately recoils. Immediately, and it turns around and it shuffles off in the direction from which it has come. Later on, we can see that a mammoth walks over the outgoing journey and steps on the human tracks. The mammoth either doesn't scent the human or doesn't seem particularly interested, so the mammoth is not worried. And then finally, on the return journey, the adult, who appears to be without the child because the child's footprints no longer appear, walks into the mammoth's tracks. So we know that the mammoth, the sloth, and this adult and child are on the landscape within the same few hours of each other. And so the first thing which comes into my mind is, what does this tell us about the predator-prey relationships? Well, firstly, if I was to put myself in the position of the adult with the child, if I was feeling threatened on the landscape, I would take a group of people with me, and they would probably all have weapons because there'd be safety in numbers. So the fact that we don't see this, the fact that this particular individual felt confident enough to undertake this journey at this fast speed over this quite treacherous, slippery surface, suggests they felt confident enough that they wouldn't be harassed by these wild animals, suggesting that they viewed themselves as quite powerful on that landscape. This is the longest identified human trackway that we have, and it tells us a lot about the attitudes of the other animals to the humans. Now, it was recently so that's the slide of the return journey, in which you can see the point that I just made, is that the mammoth, excuse me, the mammoth had stepped on the human trackway, and then the human track maker had excuse me. The human track maker, excuse me, had stepped into the mammoth track. Ultimately, we don't know the purpose of the journey, but it does tell us a lot about the co-association of these animals on the landscape. Sorry for my voice. So now, just when I need a break for my voice, I'm going to ask you a question. How do you hunt a giant sloth? I'd like you to put your ideas into the chat. You have fire, weapons, and cooperative hunting at your disposal. But the animal that you are fighting stands about 7 feet tall at the shoulder and has large scimitar-like claws. Think Wolverine. So in fact, it's a formidable predator. So I'd like you to have a think. I'll give you a minute or two. I'd like you to have a think about how you might go about using this quite limited tool set that you have in order to hunt as something as large and formidable. So now that I've given you a chance to really think about it, let's have a look at the evidence. We published a paper in 2018 in Science Advances where we clearly showed that the humans were interacting with animals like the giant sloth. They were not simply observing them. The tracks suggest that the humans were walking in the trackway. So that's what the middle panel shows. The slightly kidney bean-shaped impression is the giant sloth claws. And you can see the positioning of the human print. The human print is walking in the trackway immediately left behind by the sloth. And it appears then that the humans are, to all intents and purposes, stalking this sloth. And later on down the trackway, we see that the sloth starts to show evasive behavior. It turns around to the back of these, towards the back of these two hunters who we have the footprints for, and starts to move around from side to side, suggesting that it is feeling harassed and threatened by these humans. And we've got a video of this encounter which explains the evidence. It's powerful stuff. What it does show is that humans were exploiting the megafauna. And so we go back to our original question. Were humans responsible for the extinction of the megafauna? Does it suggest that humans were then playing a role, or was it climate change? And so this starts to suggest that humans and megafauna coexisted for a longer period of time than previously thought, but that humans were hunting megafauna. It suggests that humans then were not very numerous on the landscape, very thinly and very sparsely distributed along the landscape. And as population numbers became more numerous, so the impacts of human harvesting of these animals for food began to make themselves felt within the ecosystem. These long-lived animals, they're slow growing, slow reproducing, they slow to mature sexually with very long gestation periods. And it doesn't take much then to kill them faster than they're able to regenerate their numbers, which is what I think had happened. So ultimately, this brings us to an ecological concept called the tragedy of the commons, which was put forward by an esteemed Gerrit Harden, an esteemed ecologist, in 1968, in which he talks about how common resources, so in this case, think of it as the megafauna, or think of it as the oceans, or think of it as the Amazon. You have many humans who decide to cooperatively share this resource, but within it, Each human is trying to maximize their gain as opposed to their neighbor. It may not be deliberate, but it's obvious that everyone would try to get as much as they could, especially if they're trying to feed their village, their children, their families. And ultimately, in the third panel, you can see how these resources can be very quickly depleted as they are overexploited. And ultimately, what happens is that the entire community who are depending on that shared resource is decimated when that shared resource collapses. And it's not an intentional act. It's not a willful act of destruction. It is an act of exploitation. It is merely the act of taking enough to feed your families. But as we become more numerous on this planet, so these problems are going to become more evident. Ultimately, we are now in a position where we are apex predators. Apex predators, as you will see in this apex figure, are controlled not by other predators. Apex predators are controlled in natural environments by either killing themselves or by hunger because their food sources have disappeared. So our moving through this trophic levels and becoming apex predators has put us in a powerful position, but in a position now where our populations are unregulated and the only thing that will regulate it is a lack of resources. And I show this slide because it shows a map of the globe, but as a function of population, we have recently passed estimates of about 7.8 billion people on our planet. Some people believe that our planet was really only set up to deal with maybe 2 billion humans at the most. And so it's clear that as we are more numerous on the planet, so our need for resources, even though they may be modest on a personal level, will increase. This then shows that we have multiple challenges that await us as a species. This is the yellow tuna, the bluefin tuna. And it suggests that what we're doing with our resource exploitation of something like the commons, which would be the oceans, is we are all overexploiting these marine resources, including these large, slow-growing species like the tuna. And in fact, the extinction of the megafauna wasn't the end of sort of human overexploitation within their environment. This is something that we're continuing to do today. Because, as other predators do, sometimes when one prey animal becomes extinct, you move on to another prey animal. And this creates a sort of a pattern of where we continue to destroy these habitats, where we continue to create problems with ourselves. We have seen a recent increase, for example, in the amount of infectious diseases. And some people have said that as we start to exploit and cut down greater areas of the forests, we may well encounter some of these zoonotic diseases, which may continue to create problems like COVID for ourselves. Ultimately, we are a powerful species. And the experience with COVID has shown us that we are able to react quickly and efficiently to threats when we need to. However, our minds are really only set up to deal with threats that are immediate and right here. The puma, the lion, the armed individual right next to you, that is how our bodies are physiologically programmed to think about threat and fear and the flight or fight responses. Our bodies are not really programmed, and our brains are not programmed to really accept or take account of longer term, slower developing threats, such as some of the problems that we have at our species level at the moment. So we are currently our greatest threat, but we are all capable of small positive changes that we can make every day. And together, I believe these small positive changes can help us yield new insights in how we can tackle some of these challenges, and also greater awareness of our individual impact on our planet. Earth Overshoot Day, for example, is a day when we realize that we've used up 1 year's worth of resources, and Earth Overshoot Day will fall in July this year. So we as a species are using 1 year's worth of resources within 7 months. So it's clear that our exploitation and our overexploitation of resources is something that we all need to be aware of. I'd like to leave you with a positive thought, which is from Baba Dionne, who said that in the end, we will conserve only what we love, we will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions when we have heard from the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sally. That was absolutely fascinating. I just can't believe what you can tell just from footprints. Absolutely amazing. There's been a lot of international news coverage about the footprints and about your research, including the cover of last month's New Scientist magazine, which was really exciting. Why do you think that they've garnered so much interest?
The footprints are quite relatable, aren't they? When we go to the beach over the weekend, we'll all be leaving footprints. It's something that we connect with. And the double trackway story of the humans with the little baby going on this mission with this crying child, possibly ill, is something that I think we can all relate to. So unlike a stone tool, which none of us have ever made or used, there's something very evocative about these footprints. You're looking at something that is tangibly a human being, and it sort of speaks to you from the past about where those feet were treading and sort of the animals they were encountering. I think that's why.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. It's so interesting as well about how it relates to today and you know what we're doing today as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break now. When we're back, we're going to, I'll be introducing our second speaker for this evening, Dr. Philip Riris, who will be discussing how ancient humans adapted to changes in the climate and environment. We'll break for 5 minutes, so please do take this opportunity to stretch your legs, grab a snack, grab a drink, and then we'll see you very soon. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a chance to grab a drink or a snack. I'm personally still mourning the extinction of the giant sloth because that animal was absolutely amazing and I really wish they were still around today. But moving on, I'm going to welcome our second speaker of the evening, Dr. Philip Riris. Philip, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Welcome everyone to my talk. Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to all of you. As Amanda said, my name is Philip. I'm an archaeological modeler. I'm a lecturer in archaeological and paleoenvironmental modeling. What that means is that I use computational analysis and statistical methods to understand more about how humans have adapted to crisis in the past. Now, in the long course of human history, we are not the only society to have experienced crises. And so my work focuses on figuring out how archaeology can help us learn how human societies have adapted successfully or not in the past, and what steps perhaps may be taken in the future. So I hope to share with you today some of my recent research into this exact matter. Next slide, please. So in 1980, the biologist Paul Ehrlich bet the business professor Julian Simon $10,000 that due to population pressure, catastrophic resource scarcity, which Sally has just so forcefully reminded us of, would affect the globe by the year 1990. Long story short, Dr. Ehrlich lost his bet because over the 10 years of their wager, the commodity prices that they bet on actually fell in value rather than rose in value. So far, so good. That being said, the specter of population pressure and its potential dangers, such as overconsumption or overshooting the capacity of our environment to support us, still rears its ugly head from time to time. And a new analysis by the United Nations projects that global population will reach between 10 and 12 billion people by the year 2100. So while governments, international bodies, NGOs, and etc. have started to think of this as a challenge of resource distribution rather than one as consumption as such, has this always been the case? What can we learn by looking at societies in the past and how they have dealt with shocks or disturbances to their social systems? What are the lessons that can be learned, if any, about the pressures we exert on our environment and vice versa in the past? So can we find potential solutions rooted in the study of our species population history for our current challenges? So I'm going to throw a question at you, a nice and easy question just to begin with, warm you up a little bit. How do we measure population? How do demographers, governments, bodies like the Office for National Statistics measure population? I'll turn my attention to chat. How do we estimate the population of a place like New York City? The answer might come to you easier if you are from the United States. Census, exactly. Thank you, Wendy. That was exactly the word I was looking for. So in the US, they have the US Census Bureau, which carries out censuses. Now, second question, a little bit harder. Would anyone like to take a guess at the age of the oldest census that we have in the historical record? And where that might be? Ancient Greece is a good guess. Any other guesses? 1851, that's very specific. Magna Carta, interesting. Roman Empire, okay. So we have a spread here. We have a spread from about the 19th century. Sumer, nice, that's good knowledge. So the oldest reference to a census is from the Middle Kingdom in Egypt. There's also reference in the Hebrew Bible. And the oldest surviving census is actually a fair bit younger, from the Han dynasty in China. Now, even if we take the oldest of these, even if we had a census from the Middle Kingdom of Egypt about 4,000 years ago, sorry, 6,000 years ago, 4,000 BC, this still only covers about 1% of our species' time on the planet. Even if we only count our own species of human, which emerged around 300,000 years ago, censuses have been around for a very, very short period of time. This is a huge problem if we want to measure population history. So, next slide, please. It is such a problem, in fact, that there's a whole subfield of archaeology dedicated to this issue of measuring population in the distant past for when we do not have any written sources. It's the field of paleodemography, from the Greek palaeos and demos, ancient and people. So if we know how ancient populations change over time, we can learn more about the causes of adaptation or failure to adapt. In other words, what produces resilience in societies. Now, I want to describe this squiggly line here for you. Basically, it's an indication of relative population change over time that archaeologists construct to measure population in a given time and place on the basis of archaeological evidence. Now, what kind of archaeological evidence, you may ask? Well, so the basic idea is that we had an original population in the past. There was a certain number of people living in an environment, on a landscape, in a region in the past. These people had certain energy needs. They had certain requirements from their environment. And as they extracted it, they also returned it to their environment in the form of refuse, i.e. the archaeological record. The more refuse, in other words, higher numbers of people produce more refuse. The more refuse there is, the more likely archaeologists are to come along and actually date it. And ultimately, the more material there is to date, the more radiocarbon dates are produced in the end. So by looking at very, very large assemblages of radiocarbon dates, we can estimate fluctuations in the number of people that were alive at any given time, more or less, this is an approximation, in the past, producing things like what you just see here, the squiggly line. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the kinds of things that can affect the appearance of this squiggly line, very technical term, through the lens of environmental change. Next slide, please. So when ecologists talk about the things that drive population turnover or population change, they tend to categorize them in a number of different ways. Things that we would call presses that exert a gradual pressure driving a population turnover, both in positive and negative directions, can be things like urbanization. Urbanization leads to population downturn in the hinterland of a city, but may locally increase population and population density in the city. Food system change, such as the adoption of agriculture, or long-term drought can also be forms of presses that can increase population. Next slide, please. Related to presses, there are other processes called ramps, like soil degradation or soil salinization or silting up of agricultural soils, where essentially if you have a cultivated area of quite poor soil, something which is quite common in the tropics, you can only cultivate it for 1 or 2 years. Then you have to move on, cultivate a new patch, move on 1 or 2 years after that, and so on and so forth. So gradually, as it takes a very long time for soils to degenerate, it becomes this gradual ramping up of pressure on the environment until carrying capacity is exceeded and you can no longer farm that particular patch. This is just one example. Next slide, please. But what I'm mainly going to talk about today are so-called pulse disturbances. These are sudden, unexpected, and often quite dramatic events like war, like landslides, tsunamis, earthquakes, and indeed volcanic eruptions. Extreme events that are often unforeseen and can, when they fall together with other extreme events, can have quite severe knock-on effects for the societies experiencing them. And climate scientists predict that extreme events will become more common in the near future due to the effects of increased atmospheric CO2. Events that were previously sort of one every 50 years are probably going to become more like 1 in 10 years. So this is an issue that is at the forefront of some of the finest scientific minds on planet Earth. Next slide, please. So until now, I've been talking quite a bit in the abstract, but let's go a little bit more into the specifics in the next half of my talk with some work that I recently did with my colleagues at UCL. So cast your minds back to the continent of South America at the end of the last ice age. We're leaving behind a world of pioneers who are settling a new continent, as Sally just reminded us, living alongside megafaunal giants, and we're entering one where the climate is warming, the ice caps are melting, forests are expanding, and the sea is reaching close to its present level. Next slide, please. So alongside this change in climate environment associated with the end of the ice age, we start to see new and exciting things happening archaeologically as well. People change their ways of life. Rather than only being mobile hunter-gatherers, people start doing strange things like investing in places, investing in infrastructure. For example, for food processing on the right there at the San Jacinto site in northern Colombia. And they also open up new niches for exploitation. There's a tremendous amount of evidence for marine resource exploitation, for example, at the Ring site in Peru, things that we don't see that much in the preceding ice ages. People were taking advantage of different niches. And so gradually, piece by piece, in some areas of this huge and mega biodiverse continent, people's livelihoods stop resembling the highly mobile Nukak of the Colombian Amazon or the Selknam of southern Chile, and start to perhaps resemble more like the kinds of things that the Canela of Ecuador get up to. Now, what do I mean by this? Next slide, please. Much like in the old world, in the Near East and in China, people start experimenting with new and exciting forms of food production. They start, instead of surviving purely off of hunting and gathering wild foods, they start to experiment with domesticated foods as well. Foods like beans, maize, cassava, also known as manioc. Squash is a very early cultivar, around 10,000 years ago. And peach palm is certainly domesticated by around 7,000 years ago. Against the backdrop of this improving climate, improving stable climate. So far, so good. Until about 8,200 years ago, a date which marks the start of a period called the Middle Holocene. So across South America, what we see at this point in time, or roughly around this point in time, at the Middle Holocene, as opposed to the early Holocene, is a pattern that has been called various different things by different archaeologists. Regional abandonment, population collapse, archaeological silence, gaps in the record. And what me and my colleagues wanted to know were, are these disparate patterns from all over the continent perhaps linked in some way? And this specific point in time, 8,200 years ago, is interesting for all sorts of reasons that I'll explain just briefly, as it's quite relevant to what I'm about to say. So as I said, although the last ice age had ended and the world was warming, it still took a really, really long time for the glaciers to retreat. And they didn't always retreat in dribs and drabs. In fact, one of the largest ice sheets in North America, the Laurentide ice sheet, appears to at least once have collapsed rather catastrophically and released a vast quantity, an absolutely tremendous quantity of cold, very fresh water. Remember, this is glacial meltwater into the North Atlantic. Why is this important for South America? Well, North Atlantic sea surface temperatures have a strong effect on the climate of South America. And the map there on the right is a simulation of what happens to sea surface temperature when you dump a load of cold, nearly freezing water into the North Atlantic. And we're talking millions of cubic meters of water. effectively what happens is as sea temperatures lower, there is less evapotranspiration. There's less evaporation of the seawater. This means that there's less moisture in the atmosphere, and consequently there's less moisture available to fall as rainfall in South America. This is because of the direction that the atmosphere flows over the North Atlantic. It goes from north to south towards the equatorial regions. And we know this because it's recorded in lots and lots of different proxies that the geoscientists and archaeologists use to measure environmental change. We have stalagmites in caves, which record the amount and the chemical makeup of drip water that forms them. We've looked at marine sediments and the chemical makeup of the minerals and the sea creatures that fall to the seafloor and form marine sediments. And in addition to marine sediments, we also have the geochemistry and the pollen count, pollen content of lake sediments to measure similar things. So what we wanted to know is whether or not this event, this 8.2 Ka event, is linked to our archaeological patterns. In other words, we had a hypothesis that could be tested. So the map on the left there is the result of our survey of all dated archaeological sites in South America. We took data from the published literature in addition to our own data collection efforts, and plotted all of our data in the form of a squiggly line, so that we looked at all the radiocarbon dates we could find from the Amazon basin to the Andes to the far south and to the east, about 5,500 dates in total across more than 1,000 archaeological sites. So this isn't the microscale archaeology that Sally described to you. This isn't the result of one hunting trip or one back and forth trip by a mother and child. This is archaeology at the real macroscopic scale. It's a very, very zoomed out view of the relative population change over time from about 12,000 years ago, so the very end of the last ice age, until about 2,000 years ago. And here's our squiggly line again. Now, to know whether or not this actually is abnormal, is our empirical record unusual against business as usual, you might say, we needed a yardstick, and this yardstick was in the form of a statistical model of exponential population growth. That's what you'd expect as a baseline null hypothesis in ecology and in population ecology and in demography, all sorts of other different fields. It's a good yardstick. And we compared this null hypothesis against our actual record of the distribution of radiocarbon dates. And what we found, if you could go to the next slide, what we found is that starting around 8,200 years ago, there are these major busts, statistically significant busts in the level of population as recorded by radiocarbon dates that coincide with the Middle Holocene transition, lasting beyond 6,000 years ago. So this is several millennia of quite significant population downturn, potentially with some short-term recoveries scattered in between there. So this was quite an interesting finding. Furthermore, we took all of those records that I mentioned, marine sediments, lake sediments, stalagmites, and we looked at the number of extreme events that they recorded over time. So the number of outliers in all of these independent records of climate across South America. So we got a nice north to south transect from the Caribbean Sea all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, or nearly Tierra del Fuego, and we essentially counted up the number of extreme events per century. We averaged it up to the century, and so around this Middle Holocene transition, around 8,200 years ago, we see the greatest number of extreme events persisting again until about this point 6,000 years ago, after which population recovery is evident. Next slide, please. So the climate of South America is influenced by more than just the North Atlantic. We know this. The southern cone, so the area of the continent where it starts, but around about the Tropic of Capricorn, where it starts tapering in to become more narrow and pointed, has a different climatic regime than the tropical zone. So we weren't just interested in extreme events in an absolute sense. We're also interested in the spatial signature of these extreme events. So we use climate modeling to map out where the highest variability lay. So areas north of the Tropic of Capricorn, north of about 25 degrees south, are more highly variable over the interval that we're interested in. So if we use this to group our dated archaeological sites, the tropics in orange there and the extratropical South America in purple there, we can compare trends in these two independent records against one another and show. Next slide, please. So there are two records, tropical in orange and purple extratropical in purple. We can compare these trends against each other, and we show that the areas that have the highest variability in climate, next slide please, also suffer the greatest population decline. So those red bars in this case are areas where our orange line, our tropical populations, are significantly lower than you would expect under a business as usual scenario. Meanwhile, the southern cone isn't suffering in the same way as the tropical area, where we are seeing the highest variability. However, it should be noted that at the conclusion of the Middle Holocene, about 4,000 years ago, tropical South America, this area that has suffered the most, actually experiences a population boom, exceeding expectations in a big way around 3,000 years ago. And you can see how it just goes up above and beyond the purple line all the way to the right of this graph. Next slide, please. So what could be behind this pattern in tropical South America? Well, I've already explained the downturn bit, but what about the recovery? So out of all of the foods that I mentioned earlier, maize, manioc, peach palm, cassava, they were all domesticated in the American tropics. So while people here may have been more exposed to the Middle Holocene event that happened in the North Atlantic, they also had a greater diversity of foodstuffs to draw on when other resources were unpredictable or in flux. In other words, wild resources that were unpredictable were not favored, well, they were less favored than domesticated foods, in other words. So we interpreted this pattern, initial vulnerability and population downturn followed by a significant increase, as driven by the diet breadth and the types of foods that were available to societies in the South American tropics. So in other words, although decline was widespread during the Middle Holocene, the people who did best out of it were the ones who were already experimenting with cultivated as opposed to wild foods. Our lesson here, in other words, is that a diverse resource base can buffer against shocks to social systems. And at the very end of this sequence, so towards 3,000 years ago, is when we start to see evidence that people were also beginning to organize themselves in new ways. Things like monumental and ceremonial architecture emerge off the back of intensive resource exploitation. So that kind of sums up a nice little neat single case study. I know it's hard to think of the archaeology of an entire continent as a neat little case study, but I'm interested in the really big picture. How do human societies absorb disturbances in general? How do they recover from them, and what pathways do they take, averaged across the history of humanity as a whole, and what can we learn from that? So this is the same logic as a medical trial. You won't learn very much about what effect a drug has if you only apply it to if you only administer it to one population, to one group of subjects. What you need is a lot of subjects and a lot of different backgrounds, like ethnic makeups, sexes, genders, etc., in order to randomize the effect of the drug. And from this, you learn a lot more about what are the underlying drivers, what is the underlying mechanism supporting one intervention or the other in the case of medical trials. This is what we're trying to do using this exact same approach across the world. So looking at the Great Basin of America, coastal Peru, Greater Amazonia, Arctic Norway, all the way to Southern Africa, as far east as Korea, and everywhere in between. So this is ongoing work. Next slide, please. This is ongoing work that myself and colleagues at the Institute for the Modeling of Socio-Environmental Transitions are undertaking. Here are our members. We are led by our director, Emma Jenkins. Give us a follow on Twitter. We organize a seminar series independent of this public lecture series, but it's open to the public as well. You'd be more than welcome to join. We'd be thrilled to have you. Yeah, please watch this space. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I haven't gone over time. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to field any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Philip. You haven't gone over time. We're absolutely fine for time. This is obviously a really exciting new area of research for IMSAT. Where do you see it going over the next few years?
So what I would like to do over the next few years is really start a dialogue with climate scientists, with the people who set policy, with the people who set land use agendas and conservation agendas, in order to use archaeological data more to inform the sort of baselines for restoration and conservation and ecosystem management that we set for ourselves. Because people have been manipulating their environments for millennia. The exact date of inception, let's say, that people start to exert a really significant impact on their environments is debated. It's a matter of some debate, but it's unquestionable that we have modified ecosystems for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So to start incorporating that knowledge into our climate change mitigation strategies is something that we are really keen on doing and hoping to do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite Sally back now and take some of your questions. I can see that Sally's been doing a great job of answering some of them in the box. So what I might do is just ask for a bit more detail, if that's okay. So Sally, I'm going to start with you with the top question that has the most votes at the moment, which is Beth's question about archaeologists previously thinking that humans arrived in North America 5,000 or so years later, after a warmer period melted glaciers, to allow a land passage from Asia to North America. Now that you believe humans were there much earlier, do you still think this was their route? Sally, do you think you could expand on your answer about the routes?
The answer is, unlike the movie The Ice Age, there were loads of ice ages, and they happened periodically through our Earth's history. So what we know is that there was probably a gap between the last glacial maximum and the one that came before, in which our ancestors crossed over the Bering Straits and came down into North America, and then the corridors closed with these two ice sheets, but we were already there. So previously, the Clovis first hypothesis had said that humans couldn't have arrived because these ice sheets were like two closing doors that had blocked access from Alaska south. And basically, we were waiting for those ice sheets to melt. But the truth is, the humans had got there long before the ice sheets even closed. Now we have to work out sort of at what stage they entered the top of North America and how they trickled down. And there are, in fact, several different hypotheses. So there's the ice-free corridor hypothesis, there's the kelp highway hypothesis, and then there are some hypotheses about open seafaring and how that may have happened. But we think that the Bering Straits route was probably still the main route. It was just that little bit earlier. So thank you, Beth, for that question. That was a really good question.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Philip, I've got a question for you. I was wondering, there's been a lot of myths in societies throughout the world about a great flood, and I was just wondering if you think that the sudden melting of the glaciers may have possibly led to those myths?
Well, I can't speak about specific myths or not, but what is known is that oral histories do preserve legends for a very, very long time. There's been some really exciting research on this recently, actually, in where Australian Aborigines have oral myths about land that is no longer land. It's beneath the sea level, so it was land in the Ice Age when sea levels were lower, but today is an island or a rock outcrop in the sea, and this, we're talking about tens of thousands of years ago at this point, that the last time that anything was land. So it is potential. I'm not going to rule anything out, but we don't have any direct evidence that the flood, as in the biblical flood, is related to the North Atlantic discharge event. That's unverified, let's say.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We've got quite a few questions for Sally about the footprints. I love this one about the bum prints. And you've said that you found lots of different types of prints, Sally, including hand prints. It's absolutely fantastic. And what other evidence is there, such as Paul has said that aside from the footprints, are there evidence of weapons? You've said more details later. Do you mean now?
I mean now. I mean now. So thank you. So we are working on a paper right now which records traces of the earliest transport technology, which we think is an early form of travois, which may be poles that are lashed together, maybe spears that are lashed together in an A-frame, which have been dragged through the sediment. So what we have is evidence which records technology made of wood, potentially, which would not have survived. And these archaeological traces, this trace evidence, is all we have of these artifacts. With respect to the bum prints, it's probably only a matter of time before we find one. We haven't found one yet, but we have found handprints. And so the question about the spears, the marks of the spears, is what prompted me to think about sharing this with our audience, that we have this early travois technology and perhaps just evidence of one individual pulling a spear behind them and then moving the spear to the other shoulder. And we can see some of this evidence, and that will be published hopefully in a few months, and very exciting stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you. That is very exciting. Thank you. And Philip, we have a question here. A determinant of problem solving is the capacity of the stakeholders to cooperate. Is it not likely to be the case that we don't yet have the international organisational infrastructure to do this? Now, I know that you were recently at COP26, so I was wondering if you could maybe link that into your answer.
Well, I think Sally hit the nail on the head in her answer there, that international agreements are key, but that personal choices, personal decision making it also has an incredibly important part to play. That being said, there's no harm in pressuring politicians to do more to increase international cooperation on carbon targets, on restoration targets, on conservation targets. It's really about using our individual power, if you like, to leverage people to take that action on our behalf.
Thank you. That's a really good answer. Thank you so much. And Sally, I have a question for you. This is a great question. How could you tell that the human, sloth and mammoth footprints were all made at the same time and not a few days or weeks apart?
Yes, that is an excellent question. So in the case of the double trackway, we have evidence that the sediment was slightly wetter as the individual was moving out on the outward journey, carrying the child, and that a few hours later, when the individual returned, it was slightly drier. So it's a single episode of wetting of the sediment and drying of the sediment. And we can see that there's no evidence of disturbance or changes or erosion of the habit of the footprints at that time. And the fact is that the mammoth walked over the outward track, and the mammoth was then walked over by the human in return. And so it's literally the humans and the mammoths are very close to each other. Now, we don't know if they are close enough to see each other sort of from a distance. We don't yet know that. And then, of course, in the sloth sequence, we have evidence of the humans and the sloth directly interacting. So we may have a pause of a few hours, but certainly no longer than that.
That's absolutely it. But I just still think it's incredible that you can tell all of that from the footprints. It's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And Phil, we've got a question from Anna here, asking, do you consider different technological innovations and map how that supports population growth as well as the impact of different climate events?
Yes, so we have a good handle on what technological innovations took place over this interval, and there has been a large body of work performed on estimating the effects, for example, of the adoption of agriculture on population growth. In this particular study that I spoke about today, we didn't deal with that. However, people are working on exactly this question: what technological what are the kinds of technological innovation that drive population change or can influence population change in one direction or the other? And that can include agriculture, that can include more settled life ways, and disentangling one from the other, essentially, yes.
Brilliant, thank you. And both of you touched on how these events happen, whether they're climate events or whether we're overusing resources. But what advice do you think we could take from our ancient ancestors about how to survive these cataclysmic events?
Shall I begin with that one?
Yes.
So I think the answer to that one is has to do with the wording of the question. So cataclysmic events like the North Atlantic discharge, like volcanic eruptions, take your pick: tsunamis, war, landslides, urbanization, anything that I mentioned in my talk, they're going to happen anyway. Cataclysmic events are always going to happen anyway. What makes a cataclysmic event a disaster is down to human decision-making. Consistently, what we see throughout human history is that societies that do the best out of cataclysmic events, out of disasters, are the ones that have robust social networks, are socially resilient. They have the mechanisms and the decision-making tools to make informed, clear decisions about how to deal with disasters. And secondly, as I alluded to in my talk, diversified resource bases, because again and again in history, what happens is that monocultures go under. We see it in the Amazon, we see it in Mesoamerica, and potentially we see it other places as well. Diversified resource bases, strong social networks, that's my message.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So we've come to the end of our questions now, so I just left to say thank you so much for both of you for taking the time to join us tonight and giving us some really fascinating insights into how ancient humans coped with changes to their environment. To everybody in the audience, thank you so much for all your questions and for engaging so brilliantly with us tonight. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with links to the research, and please do keep an eye on new research appearing on the Bournemouth University website as well. The email will also include a feedback survey, and we'd be very grateful if you could fill that up for us, because it really helps us to ensure that we're putting on the best possible events for you. We also have a green button you'll see at the bottom that says see about the other events in the series, where you can sign up to future events. So we've got 2 left in this series, and our next one will be on the 1st of June, which is a Wednesday, and we'd really love it if you could join us for that one. That one's on listening to seldom heard voices, and we'll be exploring how we can engage creatively with the most marginalised in our society to ensure that their voices are heard, and how our researchers have done that. So we'd really love it if you could join us for that. We'll end this event now. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we really look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.